Okay, so we've seen a bunch of different chord progressions so far, but we could take all of them and put them into kind of three big camps. So you can go from one chord to any chord, but typically the most typical progressions go from either a relationship of a fifth, a third, or a second. Okay, so for example, let me just switch over to continuous view here and zoom in a little bit. So here's a progression that we know well. I'm just going to do it on a single staff. And in root position. Just root position for a minute. So in the key of C major, this is what? 5 to 1, right? A G chord to a C chord, 5, 1. So that's a relationship of a fifth because the root is a fifth away, right? This is the tonic and this is the fifth of it, right? So that's a fifth relationship between these chords. The roots are a fifth away. So that's one. The other one is a third relationship. Where have we seen third relationships before? How about between 1 and the relative minor? So this is 1 to 6 in this key. And that's going to actually be the relationship of a third. 1 to 6 is a relationship of a third because the root of the 1 chord and the root of the 6 chord is a third away. Okay? Relationship of a third. Another chord progression that's actually fairly common is something like this. Still in the key of C major, this would be a 4 chord to a 2 chord. We see 4-2 turnarounds all the time where we're using a 4 chord and then followed by a 2 chord. This is the relationship of a third. These are third related chords, okay, because the roots are a third apart. Right? And the last one that I mentioned was the relationship of a second. We see that in cases like a 2 to a 1, which we sometimes see. So this would be a minor 2 to a major 1. Not terribly uncommon, but the most common relationship of a 2 is probably 5 to 4, right? Let's put a 1 at the end just for fun. So 5, 4, 1. Right? So relationship of a second. So that's kind of what we're talking about right now is chord relationships. Relationship of a fifth, a third, or a second. Most of our most common chord progressions fall into one of those three things. And that doesn't mean that you should make sure all your chord progressions can be identified as one of those three relationships. No. All it means is that those are our most typical chord progressions. Now, what we're going to do going forward is we're going to look at some more ways we can use these three things, and we're going to focus particularly for now on the fifth relationships. So, for example, what happens if I go down a fifth between two chords, like G to C, and then I go down another fifth? Like, what if I went a chord that was, or a chord progression that was G, C, so related by a fifth, and then I treated C as the fifth, which would be F, and it would go like that. So I just kept going down by another fifth. Right? Now what would happen if I did it with reasonably interesting voice leading? So I'm just gonna do some inversions here to make this a little smoother. Actually, this one's gonna end up in a root position. So now let's hear it. right? That might sound a little familiar. You might have heard that before. This is not all that strange. Even though the way we see it now is totally inverted, these are still fifth related chords. The inversion doesn't show it. It makes it harder to see. But this is a G chord, this is a C chord, this is an F chord. These are all fifth related because their roots are a fifth apart. Okay? So that's the main concept that we're working with now. So let's jump in and talk about this kind of falling down and going a little farther like we did here, but we can go even farther than that.